just wanted to let everybody know, the restrooms are out the back door and then into the main part of the library, the adult side of the library, and down the hall, but you do need to ask the security guard at the table right out front to unlock the door for you, because they're beautiful bathrooms. So, without further ado, and also, if you need to get something, we have water, we have some trees back there, if you need to use the restroom, just go, it's okay. But it is my huge honor to introduce our next speaker. She's a longtime member of the League of Women Voters of San Joaquin County. And one of the great things that the League does is it prepares pros and cons on various issues. And so, Bea Lingenfelter has been, I know, she's so awesome. She has, for so many years, studied these pros and cons and made presentations to groups and to all over the place so that people are informed about what my vote means on this particular issue, if I vote for it or against it. And so I'm going to let Bea, I'm going to run over and turn on my thing. So I give you Bea Lingenfelter.
I am not the only League member that does pros and cons. Believe me, we have a ton of League members that do that. Whenever there is an election with any propositions on the ballot, then we gear up to research. We get tremendous support from doing that from our California League. They're the ones who do the deep research on an issue and present to the League members then pros and cons with what a pros and cons presentation is. It's basically the facts about a proposition. It's factual, it's nonpartisan, it doesn't give you reasons to vote one way or the other. It is simply a factual presentation about what happens if this proposition passes and what happens if this proposition fails. So today, we are really lucky in our primary because we have only one proposition. And as you know, in our general election, we usually have a dozen or more. But in our primary, the state changed how propositions are put on the ballot. And so this proposition is Proposition 1, the only one on our ballot. And it is a proposition about a change in how mental health funds are used in the state. So in order to have a passage of this proposition, it requires a 66 2/3 majority vote in order for passage. I want to tell you that my information for the proposition, the pros and cons, comes from the League of Women Voters California, but I also use a website that many of you probably know called Ballotpedia that also is nonpartisan. Also, the legislative analyst, the state legislative analyst, provides a nonpartisan presentation on propositions. And also I use California Budget and Policy Center, which is another nonpartisan organization that looks at policy for the state. So this proposition, this is the question on the ballot. And it's a mouthful. And so what you have to do is you have to kind of look at where the commas are. So it states, this is the question, should a greater share of County Mental Health Services Act funding be used, a greater share of that funding be used, comma, and new bonds issued, comma, to build treatment facilities and housing for people with mental illness, substance abuse disorders, as well as housing for other homeless individuals. So it is a two-part proposition. So you can go to the next slide. It was put on the ballot by the legislature. It's a legislature-referred state statute, and it has two major components that I just mentioned. But it was also put on the ballot by two bills in the legislature. One was AB 531, and the other was Senate Bill 326. So both of those bills address this issue. Both of those bills required that the legislature put this on the ballot. And so it is on the ballot as Prop 1. So the first part, it would amend the Mental Health Services Act, Proposition 63, which we passed in 2004. That the change would focus how that money is used. And also it would change its name from the Mental Health Services Act to the Behavioral Health Services Act, so it would be called the BHSA. And also expands the act to include treatment for substance abuse disorders. So we'll get more into that here in just a few minutes. The second part of the proposition is that it would allow the state to sell $6.4 billion worth of bonds to build more places for mental health treatment and care related to alcohol and drug abuse, and also more housing for people who have mental health, drug or alcohol substance issues. It also would expand, currently the Mental Health Services Act requires a 16-member oversight committee. It would expand that oversight committee to 27 members. So if you remember, just a little history, Prop 63 back in 2004, we approved what was called the millionaire's tax. It's a 1% surtax on income in California of $1 million or more. And that money, since 2005, since the passage of that proposition, has gone to fund mental health services and programs. Now, it's important to realize that there is no change in that surtax. It is still 1% on $1 million or more of income. There is no increase in funding. And currently, that money goes mostly to counties, and the counties have a relative latitude on how to spend that money on mental health services within the county. Okay, we can change. So again, no change in the 1% tax. Let's talk about the bond issue part of it first. So it would raise $6.4 billion. 4.4 would go to build facilities for treatment of people with mental health and substance abuse disorders. And $2 billion would go to build or renovate housing. And you can do that, you know, like if there's empty motels or whatever, they can renovate those buildings for, to house people experiencing or at risk of homelessness for reasons of mental health or substance abuse. And so that is the bond portion. So let's look at it a little more in detail. Go to the next slide. So it's $6.38 billion. So this is a little bit of more of a breakout of what that bond measure will go for. So 2.8, almost 2.9 billion will go for grants. And a lot of this money, the majority of this money is going for grants to other entities to build voluntary or involuntary behavioral health treatment and residential treatment facilities. So about half of it would go to, a little less than half, would go to that kind of buildings. 1.5 billion would be for grants specifically to counties, cities, and tribal entities for voluntary and involuntary treatment centers. And 1.65 billion would go to loans or grants specifically for veterans, for supportive housing for veterans. And then 922 million would go for housing those experiencing or at risk of homelessness for behavioral health challenges. So that's basically how the bond measure will break out. Okay? Now, this is the county portion. So we talked about the bond measure. This is the county portion and the change in county funds. It would shift approximately $140 million from money that the counties currently get under the Mental Health Services Act. It will transfer that money to the state. And the way it does that is currently counties receive 95% of the funding and the state receives 5% of the funding. This would change that ratio to 90% for counties and 10% for the state. What the state has used the money for since Prop 63 is basically for administrative services. So the extra money that the state gets will still go for administrative services, but also there's a couple of other programs that the state can fund with it focused on mental health.
So that is one of the things that this proposition will do, is change that ratio. Okay, next one. So the legislative analyst, when taking a look at this proposition, said that it would require the counties to use a greater percentage of their BHSA funding, the new funding, for housing and supported services, leaving fewer funds for community-based mental and behavioral health issues and treatment. So the counties basically, as I've said, have had a relative lot of latitude on how they spent this for mental health issues. And they've spent it on things like outpatient clinics, treatment facilities, crisis response, early intervention, prevention, and outreach. So the legislative analyst says that counties would need to find other funding. If they want to keep the same level of services doing the same kinds of things, they're going to need to find other sources of funding to backfill what they're losing, because again, there is no increase in the amount of funding. Okay? So here's what the counties would be required to allocate their funds for under the Prop 1. 30% would go for housing intervention. Prop 1 focus is on housing and facilities and residential treatment. And so counties would be required to spend 30% of their money for interventions like rental subsidies, operating subsidies, shared housing, those kind of things, with 50% of the 30% allocated for those experiencing chronic homelessness. And then 35% would go for full service partnerships, which is basically what they're doing now, with partnering with agencies in the community to provide services to a wide variety of individuals with complex needs, not necessarily related to homelessness. And 35% would then go for behavioral health services and support, workforce training, education, and early intervention, with 51% of this 35% focused on the 25-year age people and younger for early intervention. So it changes fairly substantially how the counties would use their money. Okay. So back to the bonds for a minute. The Legislative Analyst's Office estimates that the bond would pay for approximately 6,800 treatment beds in new facilities and up to 4,350 housing units, and half of those would be specifically for veterans experiencing homelessness. And the legislative analyst believes that the number of new housing units would reduce overall state funding by about 3%, which, 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but this is not the only funding for homelessness issues. So, but this proposition would reduce by approximately that amount, okay? So of course you've got to pay off the bond, and the legislative analyst estimates that the total cost to the state to pay off the bond plus interest would be about $310 million annually. And by the time the bond is paid off in about 30 years, they would have paid off about $9-point-something billion in order to pay off the bond. And that's over 30 years. Now, the thing to remember with debt service, when you pay off bonds, you have to pay interest, etc., that comes out of the general fund. That doesn't come out of any other special funds. It comes out of the general fund. Okay? So, supporters who believe this proposition is critical say that it would pay for needed housing for people who are chronically unhoused, including veterans and those with behavioral health challenges and mental illness. They believe the bond will pay for needed construction and rehab of psychiatric and other facilities that are needed for treatment, because the state is quite under providing what is needed at this time. And then also Prop 1 would provide treatment over incarceration and is focused on the neediest subset of housing, of homeless. And then those who are against it say no. They say that the actual number of newly built facilities or rehab facilities would not have much of an impact on homelessness. That billions of dollars will be borrowed to build new locked facilities to hide the homeless and the addicted. And that Prop 1 reduces local funding for community and evidence-based treatment that is effective, and they believe that forced treatment is ineffective and associated with higher suicide risk. So before I go into the yes and no vote, I just want to share with you, I didn't put it in a slide, but in pros and cons, we like to look at the money that is supporting or opposing a proposition. And so when I looked at this, and this is coming from Ballotpedia, it was as of January 25th, approximately $10.5 million is in the support position, camp. So about $10.5 million has been contributed to do ads and so forth to support a yes vote on this proposition. And that comes from, the bulk of it comes from Governor Newsom's vote yes on Prop 1 package. But also there are other large donors. One is the Federated Indians of Grant and Rancheria that have contributed $1.5 million. Sutter Health has contributed $1.15. California Hospital Committee on Issues has contributed $1 million. Kaiser Foundation Health Plan contributed $1 million. And Members Voice of the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California have contributed $1 million. So just to know where the money is coming from a little bit. In the opposed position, that campaign coffers has only had contributed $1,000 to this point as of January 25th. And so when you look at what you're voting for, so if you go to the next slide, the yes vote means counties would need to change some of the mental health care and drug or alcohol treatment services that they currently provide to focus more on housing and personalized support services. And the state could borrow the $6.4 billion for those facilities, and more housing would be available for people with mental health, drug or alcohol challenges. That's a yes vote if it passes. And if it's a no vote, if the no vote prevails, then counties would not need to change what they're currently doing, and of course the state would not be able to sell the bonds. So basically that's the pros and cons. And when I started looking at this proposition, it was quite confusing to me, basically, because the statement, the question was so long. And then when I started to break it down, I thought, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about two different things here. So hopefully I've helped to clarify some questions for you as well. Questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes.
So, I'm with Behavioral Health Services.
Okay.
And I
Can you
work.
stand up, please?
Absolutely. I work with Behavioral Health Services. And my specialty field, my population is the older adults in our community. I didn't see anything up here that pertains to our older adults who suffer from mental illnesses. We're out there every day. You know what I mean? And the senior citizens in this community, in Stockton, is not necessarily about substance abuse, but a legitimate mental illness. But in this initiative, I didn't see anything geared towards our seniors. Where are we going to house them? I'm out there 5 days a week, from 7:30, sometimes until 3, without a lunch, caring for our seniors. And I'm an implant in this community. I'm from Southern Cal. But I care about every one of my clients with older adults and with cats. No one has said anything about housing our seniors, because I'm gonna tell you right now, they don't wanna live around adults because they have too much drama. their meds when they're integrated with this community. They need their own, and no one has said anything about our seniors, about their well-beings. How many of you have been out there knocking on doors only to discover that our seniors are eating dog food, that they don't have running water?
It doesn't exclude seniors.
But it does.
Yeah, it doesn't
exclude
exclude
them
seniors, it just doesn't focus on that
both. We need
population.
to focus on that population. They're underserved and overlooked. And they have been the trailblazers for so many of us in here. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we forget about them. They can't have stable housing. They can't have food to eat. They can't have enough money to not only pay rent, to buy food, to pay for utilities, to buy toilet paper, to buy some. Honey, I'm out there every day. Every day. And a lot of us at BHS, we go in our own pockets to make sure our people are taken care of. So we need the city of Stockton, the state of California, to put some focus on our seniors.
And we're all getting older, aren't
And
we?
we are, I'm there. And thank you for allowing me to
You're welcome,
speak.
thank you.
Valley Community Counseling across the county has places available for all the public schools for counseling needs for elementary school, junior high, and high school. Does that mean the money's gonna get pulled out of them? Because it's been very successful across the county. And so we're preventative.
Right.
Does that money get pulled out to fund the afterwards things?
Well, it does change the funding. It doesn't mean the services can't stay the same. It just means that it has to be funded in some other way. If, if the counties have to change the way they're using the funds, then, it's a county's decision on how to continue to provide those services. Yeah, I mean, there's still money in the proposition, you saw 35% still goes to those kinds of things as well. So, yeah, it's a money issue. It's a money, where are you gonna put your money? Yes?
I've got a twofold question. Question number one with it is, my concern is ongoing costs. Just because you build something, there's gonna be ongoing costs associated with that, so what is that true number? I have a couple rentals, I know what I'm talking about when you have ongoing costs and when your facility is being beat up and blah, 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 people moving in and out. And the other one is, I work for San Joaquin County, I'm concerned about the budget. So if you now add more facilities, which requires more employees, which puts more of a burden on county, and behavioral health, from my understanding, has a hard time recruiting anyway for staff. So now you're gonna have a bigger facility with no staff. So that's a concern I have as well, because there's nothing that really alludes to that, so those are my two issues, thank you.
And I don't have an answer to your questions or your comments. Those obviously are always issues. Yes?
So I worked for Mental Health Services a long time ago when the Mental Health Services Act was passed. And it really offered the county an ability to partner with other agencies and to provide more effective services. I'm very concerned about, first of all, taking money away and giving it to the state for administration. We don't need more administration services from the state. We really need to keep our money local because we need those services here for the people in San Joaquin County. And the other thing I'm concerned about, I know that veterans need services. But why isn't the federal government housing the veterans? Why are we requiring the county to house them?
Excuse me, I know that many of you are here because this is an important issue for you. And so that's why this was a two-part discussion. The first part, and thank you very much, B, it is not, I have worked on pros and cons myself. That was an excellent presentation. It takes a lot of study, and it's not just the league's information. I see you, Patricia, I'll get to you in a minute, to put things together. So, And we do have another panel. We're going to take a break after I get Patricia's question and respond to that for just a few minutes so that we can all take a breath, get some water or something at the back, give our panelists a chance to get up here and get settled. And then there will be time at the end of that program. But one of the things we wanted to do, we had a discussion at the League about whether or not to do the pros and cons, since we're going to have a panel of three knowledgeable people with different perspectives on this issue. And I thought it was really important to have the pros and cons because it means that you're really trying to have take some of the heat out of the discussion perhaps and have some background there. Which does not mean that our next panel is not going to be important, because I think it certainly is. But I'm very glad that we were able to offer the pros and cons, and it shows you the kind of things that the League does when we're looking at ballot measures. So, Patricia, that was you, right?
It was, out here, resident of Stockton, San Joaquin County, and Susan Hagan's district. I have a lot of questions about this Prop 1.
Okay, then could you wait for the next?
I can, if you make sure that they're done before my long questions come up.
Well, because this part of the discussion really was the pros and cons. We're just going to take a couple of minutes break. We will have time at the end for people to ask their questions, and we will have three knowledgeable people to help respond to those. So I'm not cutting you off, Patricia. I just think, yeah, your questions are for our next panel. So we're going to take maybe a break until quarter to 12. And then we'll be ready to go with our panel and time for your discussion.